Hi there. Today I will talk about my favorite Bitcrusher in VCV Rack. Now, I know you might be skeptical because how is it possible to have a favorite Bitcrusher? All Bitcrushers should sound the same, right? It's all about reduction of bit depth and resampling. So, mathematically, all effects like that should sound identical. However, if you look at some plugins, one of them that inspired me is Decimor 2. You'll notice that there's so much more. Jitter, dithering, bunch of filters, distortion. It's a really beautifully sounding, very organic Bitcrusher. And in VCV Rack, we can build something similar. Not only that, we can actually go much beyond that and create a really complex bit crushing machinery. So I'll start by creating a sequence. Normally I would prepare that ahead of time, but I really want you to know what's going on here. So we're going for a straight, simple subtractive synth. And we are going to drive it by the random object. I will use it as a sequence generator. The problem obviously is that now the range is too much, so I'm going to scale it down. Now, this unit is very interesting, this module is very interesting. It's a sample and hold, and it also has built-in slew limiter. So this shape, right now there's no slew limiting, and you can change that. And what's even more interesting is that you have different modes of that slew limiting. Now, for now, I'm going to turn it off, and I'm going to go through a quantizer. Remember, this one is upside down. This is a built-in vanilla quantizer. So let's do a simple pentatonic scale. So C, E flat, F, G, and B flat. I will also add a little bit of key tracking here, so this filter is more consistent. In addition, I would like to have a control over octaves here. So let's go through Octaver. And right now it's fairly random. Let's set it to 6 Hertz. But I want to make it slightly in between randomness and sequence. So I'm going to put an LFO here. And what happens is, instead of this sample and hold, instead of sampling built-in noise generator, it will sample my LFO. And if I set it to 6 Hertz and detune it slightly, there is a really nice balance between randomness and repetition. So we have our sequence, and now we are ready for our first part of our bit crusher. So there are 2 components, usually almost like 2 different processes: bit depth reduction and resampling. So let's start from the bit depth reduction. And I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking that I'm going to open browser and find a Bitcrusher here. And here's the best part. Everything we need is already on the screen. So the first module is a quantizer. And that's it. See, quantizer is actually a Bitcrusher in itself. Why? Because it divides every octave into 12 different values. So now, if our signal range is usually between -5 and +5 volts, meaning 10 volt range, it's divided into 120 different signal levels. And that corresponds roughly to a 7-bit resolution. 7-bit resolution would be 128, so we're very close. Moreover, we can now divide our signal into just 10 different values, right? And we have everything in between. Now, I know what you're thinking, that it's just a hack. It's kind of very, inconvenient thing, because we would rather have a fader here or a knob that we can adjust this ratio in real time. And I'm hoping to convince you that it's actually the other way around. This user interface is actually brilliant. It's so it opens up new possibilities, because we don't have to divide our voltage equally. Notice that we have a lot of nuance. We can make those subtle changes to our signal and how the signal is being divided. Now, it's just a nuance when you have just one quantizer. However, magic happens when we move to stereo bit crushing. Because now, look at this. Let's do this left and the other one right. As long as they are the same, you will have the signal in the center. But the magic happens if we start creating different structures here. So the more dissimilar they are, the wider they become. And it's fantastic because we have consistent sound on both sides. It's the same bit resolution, but it's just slightly different. Now, what could be better than a stereo bit crusher? Well, let's have 4 of them, and you can have a mixer of 16, and you can, or more, you can have those gigantic bit crushing opportunities here. So, for example, I could say I want those 2 that are more in the center to have harsher sound. And I can now spend hours tweaking my sound. You can also use Command R to randomize all of them. And since we have 4 of them, it might be very handy to have a mixer before them, or some kind of gain, because notice that you extend the range of the bit crushing if you increase the range of the input. So instead of having 10 volt range, you have 20, and obviously it will be subdivided to more chunks, or lower. So let's actually try that. Notice that when I reduce this level, we have more aggressive bit crushing. Obviously we have to compensate. And also you can have a silky smooth sound if all of them will be like this, and then we just chip away some random fragments to get stereo. See, the sound is much smoother now. Okay, so let's move to another subject here, adding dither. So you see, Dither dither is basically a noise that usually it's added when you reduce bit resolution from, let's say, 24 to 16 to get rid of that unpleasant bit crushing sound. Obviously we want to exaggerate it, but adding noise to this structure is actually really nice. It can add a lot. So that mixer is now very helpful. Let's add a bit of white noise on the input here and listen what happens. Very little. And let's maybe we can mix it a little bit with red. Like a nice balance. It has to be very little to add a little bit of that vintage nostalgia, I guess, like a digital nostalgia. And so that's adding noise on the input. And there's also another really good technique here, which is adding DC. Let's also clear this up a little bit. Okay, so we know where we are. So if we add LFO to our signal, I'm going to get rid of that noise for now, so it's cleaner. Let's add triangle wave. See, there's motion there, because what happens is that entire signal is kind of sweeping through our quantizer, goes up and down. And let's do, yeah. So very slow movements will give you that kind of micro PWM feel. It's probably even better on just pure drone sounds. There's movement. Notice what happens when I turn it off. Right, so much more interesting with a little bit of now, depending on what, like I have a mixer here that already reduces DC offset, so it's like a high pass filter with 20 Hertz on the input. If you don't have that, you might use just a high pass filter after quantizer, but either way, it's very easy to get rid of that DC offset, and we just want it on the input. So that's DC offset. Okay, let's move to a second part of our quantizer, our Bitcrusher, resampling. Just like before, everything we need is already on the screen. So for resampling or reducing sample rate, we just can use this random. Remember, this one is sample and hold. If we send any signal, let's actually try that. The external in over here. So you can see it samples signal at different values, and that's why we get those clicks. Now, if we increase this rate, we have our resampler. It runs at 2000 Hertz right now. We can, later I will show you can easily extend this range. Now, what is very interesting about this random module now is that, remember I told you we have a slew limiter over here, which in audio rate sounds a bit like low pass filtering. So this is so convenient. We have a resampler with a built-in filter in such a small unit. And what is even more interesting is that now all of those 4 outputs, they will sound different. Which is great because, again, we can have stereo or maybe even quad set up here. And everything from just one extremely small module. So that's basics of resampling. Now, what happens here, kind of coincidentally, is that rate of 2000 Hertz, which is another extreme convenience here, because let's talk about formants and aliasing. Just listen to something very interesting. Let's focus on just one note. So let's talk about it. What's really going on? Let's have a look at the spectrum of this sound. Which color? Oh, yeah, this is nice color. So our sampling rate is over here. It's 2000 Hertz. And the nyquist frequency is half of that, which is 1000 Hertz. And why is it important? Because it's probably the best if we visualize that this is kind of imaginary mirror for the spectrum of sound, that everything that gets below that frequency gets reflected above, and this is what we call aliasing. So watch that this peak over here is getting reflected back. Now, this is coincidentally giving us formant sounds, right? 2 formants that we perceive as this kind of vocal yai or yoi. And if you want to change the flavor of that, you can go with the rate slightly lower for that kind of more or deeper. See, it's like a more masculine sound. And if you want to go more for higher pitched kind of Donald Duck sound, you apply a little bit of voltage to this rate to go above 2000 Hertz. So you can see now we're above. So the main takeaway is that you stay close to that 2000 Hertz sample rate, and the filter has to be with high resonance, and you sweep that filter only up to the nyquist frequency, so half of the rate of the sampling rate. So in this case it will be 1000. If it's slightly above, you can extend that, because if you go above, see, these frequencies above get reflected back. And this is also in real life resampling problems. If 48 would be our sampling frequency, we don't want to have any frequencies above 24K, right? That's why you have those anti-aliasing filters and anti-aliased waveforms. So that's formants and aliasing. Let's move to another topic, which is adding a little bit of jitter. So let's clear this up. Now, this rate is now stable, but you get really beautiful effects if you add a bit of noise or instability to this clock. Just a tiny bit, so that's why I'm using VCA, maybe violet noise, because it's usually that high pitch stuff. You can also increase this rate by applying a little bit of extra volt here, like 1 or 2 volt above. It's a really beautifully sounding resampler now. See, this is without jitter. It has this kind of paper quality. It's really beautiful. I really love that sound. So that's jitter. Now we can obviously add another types of modulation. For example, we could take that VCO, maybe after the filter. So many interesting sounds here. We could even take the sequence itself. You see, it follows the sequence now. And another possibility is something that we don't have in VST plugins pretty much, which is feedback. Really beautifully broken sounds. Let's then try one last type of modulation, which is we can use a sample. I have a sample here. So it's a simple sample from Splice. And now instead of going straight to the output, I'm going to apply modulation to this sine wave. And let's go higher. It's a pretty crazy effect. So, now let's try to put it all together into one unit. Okay, so here I put together two versions of the Bitcrusher. One, the bottom one is the advanced extended one, and the simple one on top if you want to use it in your patch, like a quick Bitcrusher. So the top one sounds like this. It's a very classic sound. This is how Bitcrusher will normally sound. You can adjust. And the bottom one sounds like this, the more complicated one. So you can see I added a lot of noise. You have two different types of noise on that resampler. You also have audio rate modulation from VCO, square wave. In addition, I used a little bit of reverb output that feeds back to my resampler. I increased the range. And the Bitcrusher itself, bit depth reduction, has a little bit of DC offset running or added to before Bitcrushing. We have a bit of noise, and we have 4 units here that are spread across the stereo field.